Let's say I want to move to an all-black neighborhood. How would I be received? Oh, this interview gets really good, but more on that later. Segregation. It's such an ugly word, isn't it? It conjures up thoughts of racial discrimination and unfair social and housing practices. Many of us weren't around back at a time when people were separated by the color of their skin. It was a terrible time, but those days are behind us. Or are they? Because if you look around, there's still a lot of places in the US where entire neighborhoods are still segregated. In many of our largest cities, entire populations are divided by race. It's actually really shocking just how much we've divided ourselves. Back in the day, there were strict laws which forced people to live in certain areas of a city, and there were other underlying practices that limited where certain people could live too. The term was called redlining. Basically, certain races, mostly blacks, weren't allowed to live past a certain line in the city. But today, it's more of a self-segregation. Nobody can tell you where you can live, but many of us have chosen to separate ourselves from those of other races. People choose to live in communities they're more comfortable in, but as we're going to see, there's major social and economic challenges that come when people self-segregate. Now, of course, you're not going to find any big city in America that's completely integrated. That's just unrealistic. It's just the way things are. We're going to look at the cities in America that are the most segregated and separated by race and talk about why. It's actually pretty interesting. So let's begin. We're going to look at the most segregated cities in America. Now we're going to begin in a city that might be a little bit of a surprise, because you might not think of major segregation happening in the Midwest, but we're here in the Chicago area. Okay, maybe you thought Chicago was segregated. Now, to define which cities are the most segregated, we just have to measure where people live, right? So for this analysis, you just have to look at census data on where people live and divide the map up by race. In many of these zip codes we're going to talk about, hardly anybody lives in a zip code with anyone from a different race. Like, look at this. Here's the map of Chicago. The dark blue area is where the white people live, the orange part is where the Hispanics live, and the red area is where the black families live. Most of the Chicago suburbs are white, and this area here on the south side is all more than 90% black. Since 14% of the US population is black, if this part of town was perfectly integrated, then the black population here should be 14%. It is clearly not that. Not even close. Some blame Chicago's segregation on past administrations that funneled money away from poorer parts of town and into downtown. And Chicago's lost 200,000 middle-class black families, which is furthering the divide here. Will Chicago become integrated? Down here in the south side, where it's almost 100% black, it's very dangerous and property values are very low. White people can't even go into the black parts of town, much less move into them. And can we expect poor black families to move into the safe Chicago burbs? Now take a look at this map of Jackson, Mississippi. It's pretty much west versus east. The west side of town's black and the east side of town's white. More than half of the whole black population in Jackson lives in these few neighborhoods on the city's west side. There are many entire neighborhoods here where it's 100% black, not a single person of another race. And then on the east side of town, there's large pockets where it's 95% white. Again, like in many other cities we're going to talk about, this goes way back to exclusionary zoning policies which enforce the patterns we still see today. It's been 50 years since the Fair Housing Act was passed, but things have not changed to this day. 50 years later. Here's what one Mississippi resident had to say about how folks down there self-segregate. Would you say it's more segregated than racist then, in the sense that you've got the black folks at church and then you've got the white folks at their church, you've got the predominantly black parts of town, the white parts of town?
Because you really wouldn't see too many white people going into a black church, or too many white people going to a black people funeral home and vice versa. And I don't know if that is because there is some kind of, I don't really know. I've never seen that before, because I've never been to a black church, nor have I been to a black funeral home. And that's not personally because, I have nothing against, because I don't want to mix it. I guess it's just how we're raised down here. Like they have what they have, we have what we have. I mean, I don't know. I have no idea. I don't know how to answer that correctly, I guess.
Yeah.
I guess it's just how you grow up and how you perceive different things. But I can see how people would think that, because we do have like certain things like a funeral home or a church that is separated by their race. But ultimately, a Black person is more than welcome to come to a predominantly white church. Like I can walk into one and it'd be no problem.
Of course, Los Angeles is extremely segregated, but LA is also very diverse. It's the only city we're going to talk about where it's very mixed among different races. Check this map out. You can see how the white people live up in the hills in an area that stretches from La Cañada all the way to Malibu and down the coast all the way to LAX. The Black population is mainly in the Inglewood area these days. The Hispanics are all in South LA and in East LA. And Asian families all live in areas like Rosemead, Temple City, and Monterey Park, and in Chinatown, and in large areas of East LA County. Now, when it comes to why Black families live in Black areas, well, it's because they were sort of at the mercy of public policy. They kind of had to live in one part of town. But for Hispanics, Asians, and other races, they all live together because of traditional patterns of ethnic immigration. When you see neighborhoods that are mostly Hispanic or Indian or Chinese, it's because they intentionally moved by each other. You kind of live where you feel most comfortable, right? You kind of live where you have family and the culture is just like yours. There's hardly any integration in Los Angeles. It used to be way different here. The Black population was a big part of South LA, and then Black families left the LA area beginning in the 90s, and so the Hispanic population moved in to take their place. So it's been segregated here for a really long time. LA is exactly as segregated as it was 30 years ago. It's just that the location and the type of race has changed. LA is really diverse, but people are not living in diverse communities. Now look at Memphis, Tennessee. This whole region here in South Memphis, from downtown all the way down to the Mississippi border, is all Black, as are the more rural areas on the city's north side. On some parts of the south side, it's like 99.5% Black. Here's a neighborhood with 3 white people and 1 Hispanic person, 1 white family in an entire neighborhood. And you can see a lot of the northern and eastern parts of the Memphis area, along with large neighborhoods on the north side, are all white, except for one little Hispanic part of town. In Memphis, school segregation is worse than it was even 50 years ago. Look at this chart. The percentage of schools that are 90% Black has gone up by more than 10%. Now, in a lot of the segregated cities we're going to talk about, 70% of white families own a home, but only 40% of Black families own their own home. And in these segregated cities, African Americans have only 6% of the wealth that white Americans do. It doesn't end there, though. In all of these segregated cities, the Black population earns on average 40% less in annual pay, and the Black population in these cities is also far less educated. It's also more dangerous in a Black neighborhood, statistically. And the cycle feeds on itself. When you concentrate disadvantages in the same area, the whole area becomes below average. So when will Black Americans have that ability then?
When we have enough money to deny Chinese people from taking out a loan at our bank.
Oh, so when you guys can look down on another race, then you'll feel like better, like
it's not really look down, but bring harm.
Okay.
Bring harm to another group.
Now we're going to remain in the South, where of course you would expect lots of segregation. Birmingham, Alabama was maybe the most extreme example of Southern segregation back in the day. It wasn't until the Supreme Court intervened in the 60s until Black and white families were treated equally under the law, but segregation and discrimination still exist today in many parts of the South. Let's be real about that. Look at the map of Birmingham. You can see here in the city center north and southwest, it's almost 100% Black. Look, there's even neighborhoods in Birmingham that are 100% Black. And then there's a really sharp dividing line, Highway 76, where it becomes almost all white, especially in the suburbs here, in places like Vestavia Hills, Mountain Brook, and Homewood. Now this is no accident. Back in the day, Black families were intentionally excluded from living in certain areas, and they weren't given the option to buy homes in affordable areas. So they all had to live in the bad parts of town, which meant closer to downtown. And then as more Black communities moved into the downtown area, the white population moved outward. The term is white flight. It still happens today. White suburbs are expanding even further away from city centers. You can see examples of this by looking at the racial disparity map of Birmingham. Here we are in Cincinnati, one of 2 Ohio cities we're going to talk about. Nearly half of the population of the greater Cincinnati metro area lives in a segregated area. You can see the green dots are where the black population lives. It's all areas pretty much near downtown, outside of an area directly north of downtown, where there's a lot of gentrification happening. Gentrification is a real thing, where they tear down poor areas and build fancy new stuff. And then of course you can see the blue dots where all the white families have moved into the suburbs. In one part of Cincinnati, there's a road that pretty much separates the black and white people. These maps are actually pretty cool. Here's an example of San Francisco, which is considered very integrated. Lots of dots mingling with one another, although there's large areas where Asians, whites, and blacks live. Here's the whitest city in the country, Portland. All those red dots are white people. Now here's Louisville, Kentucky, which has another really segregated metro area. The west side of Louisville is almost 100% black, and just about every zip code outside of the Louisville metro area is all white. A lot of the area directly south and east of downtown is fairly mixed, but not completely integrated. Louisville's worked hard to diversify its schools by busing kids into schools outside of their neighborhoods, but the residents here still live in sharply divided neighborhoods. This little part of Louisville right here is home to only 3% of Louisville's population, but a quarter of the city's black population lives right here. Louisville was the first southern city to adopt an open housing law, but segregation really took off here following the 1968 riots. Again, violence and crime led to white flight into the burbs. One study says things probably won't change here soon. The history here suggests the Louisville metro will continue to see affluent white suburban sprawl, while its poorer and non-white residents are going to remain disproportionately clustered in the old parts of the city, the study says. If you live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, you know how segregated your city is. About 1/3 of all blacks in the city of Milwaukee live in a small 3 zip code area just north of downtown, and all of the Hispanics live on the south side of town. Then there's very distinguished dividing lines where it becomes all white in the outer burbs. The black population wasn't attracted to Milwaukee until around the 1960s. They came looking for all the manufacturing jobs. But then as soon as they got here, the area saw a huge loss in the manufacturing jobs. It was just bad timing, so a black middle class could never really get established here. Milwaukee's been called the worst city in America for African Americans. The economic disparity between races here is almost the highest in the nation, and Milwaukee incarcerates more African Americans per capita than any other city. Now, what does that all have to do with segregation? Maybe these facts are a result of segregation. I don't know. Now, we looked at Cincinnati earlier. Here's a look at the Cleveland metro area, which is even more segregated. Everything on the east side of downtown, all the way into East Cleveland, is more than 90% black. And many parts of the east side of this metro area are 100% black. You might find a white or Hispanic house mixed in, but not often. There's one little pocket south of downtown where there's a Hispanic population, but everything on the west and south side of town is very white. The same general pattern we've seen in other cities. Now, one interesting thing I've noticed is that in the white areas, there's more likely going to be black families than there are going to be white families in the black parts of town. During the 1900s in Cleveland, black families could only access housing on the east side of the city. And so there you go. That's still the way it is, even 70 years later. Now, Detroit's perhaps the most racially segregated city in the country. Half of Detroit lives in a part of town that's 80% or more their own skin color. In Detroit, half of the entire city's black population lives right here in an area that composes just 18 zip codes. That's 8 Mile Road right there. You've heard of that before. Anything above 8 Mile Road is going to be 80% white. Anything below 8 Mile Road is going to be 95% black. And anything down here is going to be 75% Hispanic. There used to be an actual wall that separated parts of town up here near 8 Mile Road. Look at that. A wall separated people by race. You can blame housing policies, a loss of jobs, or disinvestment as to why Detroit and other cities we talked about are so segregated. But today, it's more and more likely choice. We're intentionally segregating ourselves. There's nothing holding people back from moving into neighborhoods that have a different race. You either choose to move there, or if you can't move there, you work hard to get to a point when you can move there. Will segregation ever change? Some say there's still lingering racial discrimination policies in the housing market. And if the minority population's poorer, then how will they integrate into the more expensive white burbs? And would the white population intentionally move into a poor minority area? Or do people even want to integrate? I don't know. You tell me. Hey guys, so if anything I just talked about upset you or made you sad or mad, well then do something about it. Call your local leaders and demand change. Chip in and help those in need. Make your community better, because communities don't get better without hard work and determination. America's a great place. It just needs some more love and pride.
This is Sage, Nick's manager. This has been a Corner House Entertainment production.
And are you looking to move and need advice? I do consulting. That's right. I'll sit down and talk about where the next perfect place for you and your family should be. I do it all the time. Together, let's find you a new home that's safe and checks all your boxes. You can get my email in the description to find out how I can help you find your perfect relocation. And I can also help you find your new house too. Email me and I'll work with you on not just helping you figure out where to move, but I can help you find your perfect home too. That's right. Someone's a realtor now. Who wants to deal with a realtor they don't know when you can have me help you, right? Why do you feel that like a white family wouldn't want your family to move into their neighborhood?
I think people still have a phobia about property value. They want to live amongst people, like-minded people whom they feel, of their culture and their language and history and whatever. When you have these new people coming in, even here, when Hispanics came to my community, we started hearing chickens in the morning. That was like roosters and stuff. And, people, they have their own customs. I've heard people complain about Black Americans, barbecuing too much, playing loud music. It's just, I guess people are become irritated with a lot of the different cultural things and attitudes and behaviors and things and customs that people have, that others have.
Mm-hmm. So a white family wouldn't want a black family to move on their street because the black family has customs and culture that they don't identify with or want to be around. That's what you're saying?
That too is an issue, yes.
Like what cultures and customs are those that you think a white family would not want on their block?
Definitely the loud party music that the Black Americans have a tendency of doing, but everybody does that. I mean, look, I've gone to parties, in the white neighborhood, and white guys are playing heavy metal, but they're comfortable with that. A lot of older white guys whom I worked with, I mean, they immediately turned off by hip hop music, and I just, it's just a matter of the, people's comfort zone, comfort level, and
Mm-hmm.
so forth.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the everyday person believes that this uncomfortableness has anything to do with hate. They just, it's just, it's just a matter of taste and a comfort level that they just don't have, a tolerance that they don't have. It's a word of tolerance.
I understand what you're saying. Now let's reverse it. Let's say I want to move to an all black neighborhood. How would I be received?
I don't think Black Americans will really care much. They might, they might look at you and question why you're there, because they know you have other options. But if I've seen so many situations where white guys are in of white people are in the black community, and it's just not an issue with the black people. So long as you know, are being respectful and uh, you know, you have some integrity. I don't see an issue.
And you just are saying exactly what I would say if a black family moved on my street. If they were respectful and they were good neighbors and they had integrity and they were doing their thing, I wouldn't care. I don't care who's on my block. Like I do feel that black Americans carry a chip on their shoulder still, and justifiably so in many circumstances, because there's been a terrible past and black people are still treated differently in a lot of ways. But I feel like there's a chip on the shoulder of a typical black American that they think that white people are looking at them different, judging them and whatever. We're just like you guys. Like, we don't care. As long as you're leave me alone, be a good person, don't do anything wrong, be a decent, you know, we don't care. I mean, just like you guys don't care. If I were to move into your neighborhood and I kept my head down and I was just chilling and I said, hey, sometimes, and was quiet, you wouldn't care if I was there, right?
I believe that there is a degree of insecurity that black American people have, where they feel as though they're being judged, or maybe they are like their work environment or a neighborhood that they used to live in. They felt the tension, and it carries over. You know, possibly, I could see how that could become a psychological issue for some people. But for the most part, I mean, when I walk out on the street, you know, I can go anywhere. I don't feel uncomfortable. You know, I can go into any white neighborhood and I don't feel uncomfortable. People look at me sometimes in a wealthy white neighborhood, and they'll question why I'm there. I can see it on their face. But, you know, I mean, I do the same here. I see strangers. You know, I have a church that's across from me, so I see strangers all the time. And I look at people. I want to know who, you know, what that face looks like. So if I need to identify somebody, I've done that. I think any conscious community person would do that. Someone, you know, who loves their community and is about the community. Yeah.
So how do we fix this problem that we started talking about at the beginning? Is there a solution to steering people into neighborhoods and like an underlying discrimination, segregation thing that's going on? Is there a way to fix that so that everybody feels they're on the same level playing field?
I do know that what's happening in that industry, what the New York State has implemented in that industry, is to upgrade their training on diversity and the teaching of the laws as far as redlining and steering and discrimination is concerned. They've upgraded their process for that. You know, how well it will play out, time can only tell. But as far as us, the everyday citizen, what can we do? You know, I think every community has cultural events. I think just be open-minded to other people's opinions. I find dealing with closed-minded people to be the most challenging. I think, for example, on Facebook, I got into dialogue with a few people, and they were like, you know what? After listening to what you're saying, I understand, and I could see that racism does still exist. And I think those are the, you know, you can only reach one, you know, one person at a time, you know, and this is not my life mission, but when the opportunity presents itself, I do address it, and I try to let people know that, yeah, this is a problem. And I think one of the key things is people don't really know what racism is. A lot of people don't. They believe that it's hate, prejudice, terrorism, and racism is really none of that. Those are the symptoms of racism. Those are the indicators that say, hey, there's a problem here. Racism has a degree of competitive it involves competition. It has a degree of competitiveness with it. And if you pay attention to what happens under situations where there's competition, people get emotional and they react. And a good example of that is sports. You know, people start turning over cars and lighting buses on fire, and it's really due to the competition. And because racism involves a competition, you get these same attitudes and behaviors that come out in human beings. And quite frankly, I think the biggest perpetrator of this construct is the United States federal government. Because if you go and look up the origins of the word Hispanic, that word never existed up until 1970. Mm. It's the United States federal government puts its citizens in group categories, and has historically played favoritism amongst all these groups. And this perpetuates the problem, the tension.
Can I ask you one more question?
I think as citizens of this country, we need to have a conversation with our government.
Well, yeah, clearly we've been trying to have that conversation for 100 years. Good luck with that. Let me ask you one more question. So everybody says white people are racist. How racist are black people towards white people, in your opinion?
Technically, because racism is based on groups, not individuals. It's not with the individual. It's a group-based phenomenon. The group that possesses institutional power, those members are in a position to be racist. The group that does not have the power, that does not have institutional power, they can't be racist. For example, see, you're relating the word race with hate, and it doesn't mean hate. And that's why
racism is just like pride in your like race, right? Like you think your race is like you're proud of your.
Well, getting back to my point though, if Black Americans have never had enough institutional power to make Korean people sit at the back of the bus. Because we don't have that power, we cannot be racist. We don't have institutional power. Now, I'm going to dissect that word. The ISM in the word racism, the ISM has a meaning. You can look it up in the dictionary. It means to maintain the prevailing political policy and a political ideology.
I get what you're saying.
The word race, it's referring to something. It's referring to a competition. I'm sure you know that racism never existed before up until like the early 1500s.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Okay, so let me ask in a different way. Black people aren't racist towards white people. What views do you hold as a culture that you feel white people are this? Like, if you see white people coming down the street, you'll be like, you're judgmental, I guess is another view. Like stereotype. Like what's the stereotypical way that a Black American thinks of a white man?
I would say that they're being bigoted, or their attitudes and behavior are inspired by racism. I think that word racism is used too loosely and used out of context. So that's my response to your question about the word. But I would just say that, they're just being racially biased. That's how I would term it. And yes, as an individual, any individual can be racially biased. But to actually have the ability to apply policy and social construct and economic construct onto another group, Black Americans don't have that ability.
So when will Black Americans have that ability then?
When we have enough money to deny Chinese people from taking out a loan at our bank.
Oh, so when you guys can look down on another race, then you'll feel like better, like
Well, it's not
you'll
really
feel
look
like,
down, but bring harm.
okay.
Bring harm to another group.
Hey, so look, you're a smart guy, and I appreciate the conversation. We took this way beyond like the initial, which I like. You have a lot of good thoughts, and I hope that things can get fixed. And I do agree, it's a systemic problem that goes way beyond the government. It's business. It's pretty deep. And
Yeah, it is. And that, you know what? At the same, but I know you're trying to close, but I want to quickly end by saying that Black American people can absolutely get out from beneath racism. We just have to be on the same page about how we're going to do it.
We know about discrimination in the past and how they told particularly Black Americans that they couldn't live in particular areas. They wouldn't give them loans. They made them live on a certain side of town. But today we don't have that, or do we? And if we do, what is currently going on? I guess that's my question.
When the federal government was involved in doing it, it was called redlining.
Yeah.
It still happens covertly, and they call it steering. In other words, steering the prospect into or out of a particular community based on race.
So can you give me like an example of how I'm a Black American, I go down to get a loan from the bank, and they're going to tell me I can't live in that neighborhood, but we'll sell you a house down the street? Like, how are they legally?
How does that? Well, it's not. The thing is, it's not legal. It's not legal. But how it happens is when a housing, someone looking for housing goes into a real estate office, the real estate office neglects to show them all that's available, or only presents what's available in a particular community to direct them. Like, for example, a Black American person direct them to a Black American community and not present availability in any other community. They're
still doing that today?
It plays out. Pardon me?
They're doing that today? Like, if I go into the brokerage down the street and I'm looking for homes and I'm Black, they're not going to show me the homes in the white part. They're going to show me the homes in the Black part?
Correct. Yeah. And the name for it is steering. That's how. That's what's been exposed so far. We don't know how far this infraction goes and spills over into other aspects of the housing industry. For example, the financial aspect of it. We do know that Black Americans have a hard time acquiring loans for purchasing homes. We also know that there have also been cases where Black American homeowners, the appraiser has severely devalued the property, which hurts economically.
Yeah, I get that. What about going back to the loan thing? Is it because Black Americans traditionally earn less income, so they can't qualify for loans as much as a white American, or are they stereotyping and discriminating against a Black individual who walks into the bank that says, I need a $250,000 loan for a home, and they're going to say no because we don't have that today? I mean, how does a bank do that today? I can't imagine a bank is going to do that.
Well, yeah, the banks, they just don't approve you for the loan, or they discourage you with the amount of paperwork or the process. There are a myriad of deterrents that are at play. I'm not in the banking industry, so I can't speak to that specifically. But also, it's not something that's overt,
Well, yeah, I'm sure it's not.
But typically, I mean, within the banking industry, there are commercial banks in Black American communities. They receive and accept money from Black American communities, from Black American laborers, workers. However, historically, commercial banks in this country do not issue, I'm not going to say they don't, but they sparingly issue loans to Black Americans, period.
Are they doing this to other races, Hispanics, Asians,
Well,
Indian?
what Black Americans are noticing is that other ethnic groups are migrating in. They don't even speak the language well, and they're getting loans from banks. We do notice that. You know, they're getting financial assistance. And you know, the attitude from the Republican Party on this is the Republicans will applaud Black Americans for engaging in capitalism, but their attitude is you all can have capitalism, but without the capital. Since Nixon was in office, that has pretty much been the tone from the Republican Party.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine that banks they're going to have to be very covert about what they're trying to do, because,
well, you know, there are financial institutions in the Black community. They're just very extremely high interest rates.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so clearly segregation is currently happening today based on what you feel is steering people into certain neighborhoods. Another question for me would be, we're clearly self-segregating, right? Like we're moving to areas that we feel most comfortable in, with where our family is, where the culture is similar to our own culture. Do you think that that's just how it's going to be, that we're just going to self-segregate ourselves? Or are you saying that you think that because of laws, we're not ever going to be able to integrate with one another? No,
I'm not saying that. You know, so I grew up, I lived in Brooklyn for about 10, I lived in Staten Island for 10 years, Brooklyn for 10 years, and I returned back home. This is where I grew up, where I'm at right now. And I am very surprised to see that there is a very surprising number of Black Americans that live in the white section. You know, I lived just off of a highway, Southern State Highway, here on Long Island, and there's always, you know, typically there's always some sort of a demarcation where a railroad track, a river, a bridge, a highway separates the ethnic groups. So I have a highway that has typically separated the Black American community from the Italian American community here where I am in Long Island. And now, you know, 10, 20 years later, I'm seeing, hey, there's a lot of Black families living over there in the white community. You know, there's a lot of Hispanic families that have moved here in this section where I'm at. But there's both Black American and Hispanics now living in what has traditionally been an Italian community. So I believe that there are pockets of change where there's some integrity happening. But also, you know, there are those communities that are still being stubborn, I guess. You know, one particular town on Long Island, Levittown, has a very interesting history. Levittown, it was not created by capitalist industry. It was created by the long, strong arm of the federal government. And that is, that's socialism, which most people don't want to admit, but it's socialism. And when the federal government created Levittown, they created it for the GIs coming back from World War II. And they explicitly did not want Black American citizens in that community. And the ones that were there already, they kicked them out. I mean, there's footage of this, where some of those families speak on camera about it. So Long Island, you know, Long Island definitely has a history of segregation. When Robert Moses built the highways, he had so much tremendous power. when he built the highways and the beaches, he set it up so that specifically so that charter buses could not reach the city, the public parks on Long Island, and blacks couldn't come
Yeah.
through.
No, I get you. There's a history. Yeah, no, there's a terrible history of segregation and discrimination. I'm currently. I don't want to get too far into that because that's happened. I guess what I'm trying to understand is today what the current state of affairs is.
Well, that's why I'm mentioning it, because the past has an effect on the present.
Oh yeah, no, I get you. Would you say that the bank loan problem is the biggest deterrent for segregation among different races, or is there a bigger problem than that?
That's speaking affectionately, the bank. In the United States, Black American citizens receiving any form of what would be considered equity has been an issue. Starting with the what was that? The right after the Civil War, Homesteading Act. Starting with that.
So why? Again, I don't want to talk the past. Let's talk about now. Why do you think people would be motivated to keep Black Americans from living in different locations? What's the motivation? What's the reason today?
I don't think the relationship has really changed. They don't want Black Americans in their community. Period.
Why? Why do you think? Why do you feel that like a white family wouldn't want your family to move into their neighborhood?
I think people still have a phobia about property value. They want to live amongst people, like-minded people whom they feel, of their culture and their language and history and whatever. When you have these new people coming in, even here, when Hispanics came to my community, we started hearing chickens in the morning. That was like roosters and stuff. And, people, they have their own customs. I've heard people complain about Black Americans, barbecuing too much, playing loud music. It's just, I guess people are become irritated with a lot of the different cultural things and attitudes and behaviors and things and customs that people have, that others have. I don't think racism is ever going to go away because our government is perpetuating it. But as citizens of this nation, I think we all can work to make it better.
I agree. Yeah, man. Like we're all on the same page. Like we're all on we all want the same thing. Most of us. And we're on the same side. So we all need to work together more and try to fix the problem of what if people are unhappy, we need to figure it out. You know what I mean? I'm with you.
And I think talking about it helps. I think you and I just talking here in this, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 28 minutes. I think we brought some understanding to the table.
Yeah.